The Biden White House is entering its final days, and the administration has been basically unwavering in its support of Israel no matter what. And that's despite U.S. law and overwhelming evidence of grave and serious human rights abuses in Israel's war on Gaza, documented extensively by multiple human rights groups, Amnesty International, who we had on the show, and also journalists from Israel who've done incredible work. There's now a new damning investigation from the Israeli newspaper Haaretz based on testimony from Israeli soldiers themselves. The report centers on the Israeli military's operations in what's called the Netzarim corridor. That's a sort of no man's zone that splits Gaza into two pieces, north and south. It was created by destroying at least 750 buildings and displacing residents there. Multiple Israeli officers now tell Haaretz that it's more than just an exclusion zone. It's a, quote, kill zone, where commanders have given their reserve soldiers free rein to kill any Palestinian who enters, even children. The forces in the field call it the line of dead bodies, a commander told the paper. After shootings, bodies are not collected, attracting packs of dogs who come to eat them. In Gaza, people know that wherever you see these dogs, that's where you must not go. Another recently discharged officer from the same unit said the brutality was systematic. Quote, we're killing civilians there who are then counted as terrorists, he says. The IDF spokesperson's announcements about casualty numbers have turned this into a competition between units. If Division 99 kills 150 people, the next unit aims for 200. The IDF told Haaretz that its strikes are targeted solely at military objectives, and before the strikes are carried out, many steps are taken to minimize harm to non-combatants. Again, these are Israeli veterans of the Gaza war, an incredibly award-winning Israeli newspaper offering harrowing accounts of indiscriminate killing, the routine classification of civilian casualties as terrorists. It's possible the soldiers are not telling the truth or the story's wrong, but it's also true that that account squares with a lot of other evidence we've seen of abuses by Israel in Gaza. In a war with no end in sight, steadfast U.S. support, and no plan whatsoever for what might come after. Matt Duss is the Executive Vice President at the Center for International Policy, a former foreign policy advisor to Senator Bernie Sanders, and he joins me now. Matt, there's pretty clear U.S. law, goes back to the 1980s, particularly when Reagan and the sort of conservative Republicans and anti-communists were funding and giving arms to lots of groups that were committing wanton human rights abuses. That U.S. government has a legal requirement not to transfer arms to armies that are committing grave or systemic human rights abuses. Do you think U.S. arms transfers to Israel are in line, just not, whether you put strategic or moral considerations aside, in line with U.S. law?
Absolutely not. I mean, I want to be very unequivocal about this. The Biden administration has been violating U.S. law. They know they have been violating U.S. law for well over a year. They are clear on what has been happening. You mentioned the Haaretz report. It's an excellent report. We've seen reports of this kind from very early on in this war, most importantly from Palestinians themselves. We've seen this on TikTok. We've seen this on Twitter. Palestinians have been reporting these things. Major human rights organizations, Israeli human rights organizations have been reporting this, and this administration knows what has been happening. So yes, I want to be very, again, unequivocal. The answer is no. Biden administration has been clearly violating a number of U.S. laws that govern the provision of military aid to militaries that are violating human rights, that are violating international humanitarian law.
I want to read just more from that Haaretz investigation. Calling ourselves the world's most moral army absolves soldiers who know exactly what we're doing, says a senior reserve commander who's recently returned from the Netzarim corridor. It means ignoring that for over a year we've operated in a lawless space where human life holds no value. Yes, we commanders and combatants are participating in the atrocity unfolding in Gaza. Now everyone must face this reality. I think it's been very hard to communicate, I think both in Israel and here in the US. And I think partly because there's a fog of war, it can be difficult to get to the truth. There are countering claims in lots of specific instances, but the bulk of evidence that there really has been pretty systematic, pretty widespread violations of the laws of war in Gaza for a year now.
Yeah. I mean, in Gaza for a year now, but also, I mean, as you know, there have been clear and systematic violations of international humanitarian law in the Israeli occupation going back many decades. I mean, this is how the Israeli military, I'm sorry to say this, operates. Palestinian lives just are treated as if they have little or no value. And Israel is able to operate in this way because its patron, the United States, make sure that it faces zero consequences for this behavior. So obviously, in the wake of the horrific October 7th attacks, what we've seen is in no sense a war of self-defense. It has been a war of vengeance. And Israel has been enabled and protected by the United States, by the Biden administration, in carrying out this war of vengeance. And as I said, from very early on, after October 7th, Palestinians themselves were reporting this, Israeli human rights orgs were reporting this, and many others were.
Let me give you the argument that the defenders of this, the policy of both the Israeli government, which has been abetted by the U.S., would give. That the horror of October 7th revealed a kind of weakness and led to a new approach, which was to not tolerate this sort of encirclement. And so they went after Hamas. And I think whatever you want to say about what they've done there, they have degraded Hamas clearly. They went after Hezbollah in Lebanon. They strikes in Lebanon. Hezbollah is clearly degraded, multiple top leaders assassinated. That has reverberated in Iran, which was the sponsor of Hezbollah, is reverberated in Syria, where the Assad regime has fallen. And when you take a look around, you can have your sort of liberal Western niceties, but Israel is safer now because of what they have done.
I mean, well, there's 2 points I'd make about this. One is, if you're going to accept that argument, you're going to say that the entire body of law that was created in the wake of World War II is worthless.
Right.
And if people want to make that argument, they should make it. There is an entire body of law that was made to protect civilians in wartime, and Israel and the United States have methodically just undermined and just essentially disintegrated that body of law, not just since October 7th, but over especially the United States in the wake of the 9/11 attacks. But I think even more so in the wake of October 2nd. And second of all, yes, we can grant that Israel has accomplished some very impressive tactical feats, especially against Hezbollah and kind of crippling the Iran's axis of resistance, so-called. But the bottom line is Israel, though